You need to hear this, because when you've been loving an avoidant partner, you've been trained, almost conditioned, to believe that every warm moment is just the calm before the next cold front. You've learned to flinch at closeness. You've learned to read silence like a warning. You've learned to treat hope like a trap. And I understand why. Because when someone repeatedly pulls away, your nervous system starts living on high alert. You start asking yourself, am I too much? Am I asking for too much? Is love supposed to feel like begging for basic space in someone's life? When you're with an avoidant partner, one of the most confusing things is that the best moments can feel like the beginning of the end, because closeness doesn't just feel like closeness, it feels like a countdown. You get a beautiful conversation, a warm night, a tender look, a moment where they finally soften, and instead of your body relaxing, your mind starts bracing, because you've learned the pattern. Connection happens, and then the silence arrives, and the silence is what teaches you not to trust the connection, not because you're cynical, but because you've been trained by repetition. That's why this keynote matters more than almost anything. The real shift is not that they suddenly become romantic or expressive or perfect with words. The real shift is when closeness happens, and they don't vanish afterward. When intimacy no longer triggers punishment. When love doesn't come with an emotional tax the next day. Because the classic avoidance cycle is predictable. Closeness activates their nervous system. Their brain interprets it as pressure. Their body interprets it as danger. And their learned solution is retreat. Not because they hate you, but because their system believes distance equals safety. So they pull away, go cold, get busy, delay replies, act indifferent, or create tension. And you're left trying to decode it, trying to fix it, trying to earn your way back into a warmth that should never have been taken away in the first place. Now imagine how different it is when the shift begins. The shift begins when after closeness they stay human. They may still feel overwhelmed, but instead of disappearing, they stay in contact with reality. They stay in contact with you. They don't have to be brilliant. They don't have to say the perfect sentence, but they do something you can build on. They signal. They name. They return. They say, I'm feeling a bit flooded. Or, I need a little time to reset. Or even, I'm noticing the urge to shut down, but I don't want to do that to us. And that right there is not a small thing. Because it means they are no longer letting their fear drive the car without even telling you where you're going. Presence after closeness is the opposite of emotional abandonment. It's the moment you stop feeling like you're being rewarded and punished for the same thing, because in the old pattern you do the relationship. Right. You connect, you open up, you're loving, you're intimate, and then you get hit with distance, and your brain starts associating love with pain. Your heart starts learning that the moment you feel safest is the moment you should be most afraid. And that is a brutal way to live. It makes you anxious. It makes you hypervigilant. It makes you over-explain, over-text, overthink. It makes you either chase or shut down. And the relationship becomes a place where you're always managing someone else's alarm system. But when they start staying present after closeness, something inside you finally gets permission to breathe. Because now you're not just dealing with your emotions, you're dealing with theirs too. And when they are willing to remain in the room, emotionally, even if they're uncomfortable, it tells you they are starting to build emotional capacity. And capacity is what creates consistency, not promises, not chemistry, not apology speeches, capacity. The ability to feel the urge to run and still choose to stay connected. When you say, you don't make enough space for me in your life, it can sound like a simple complaint, like you just want more dates, more calls, more time together. But what you're really describing is something deeper and more painful. The feeling that you are always visiting their life, never truly living in it. Like you're a guest who has to knock every time. like you exist on the edge of their world, instead of being woven into it. And the reason this hurts so much is because love without space feels like love without safety. It feels like you can be wanted, but not chosen, desired, but not prioritized, missed, but not integrated. To understand why avoidants do this, you have to understand that many avoidant partners don't experience space the way you do. To you, making space means making room for connection, planning, partnership. Consistency, it means I'm letting you matter in the structure of my life. But to an avoidant nervous system, making space can feel like giving up oxygen. Because a lot of avoidants didn't build their life to share it. They built it to protect themselves from needing anyone. Their routines are not just habits. They're defenses. Their business is not always about productivity. It's about control. Their independence isn't just a personality trait. It's often a survival strategy. That's why I call it armor. Because armor is what you wear when you believe something could hurt you. And for avoidance, closeness has been linked, at some point, to overwhelm, criticism, intrusion, disappointment, or emotional chaos. So they learned early, the safest way to love is to stay self-contained. And self-contained people don't make much space, they keep their world tight, predictable, manageable. Because space for another person introduces variables. It introduces expectations. It introduces the possibility that someone might ask for something when they're not ready, or need something when they're depleted, or feel hurt when they have nothing left to give. And if you already believe you will fail at being enough, you will avoid situations that expose that fear. So what happens is, you enter their life, and they like you, they want you, maybe they even love you, but they keep you in a separate compartment. They see you in the gaps, not in the foundation. They fit you around their life, not into it. They text when it's convenient. They plan late. They avoid committing to rhythms that would require consistency. And from the outside it looks selfish. And sometimes it is, but very often it's also fear disguised as, I'm just busy. I'm just not a planner. I'm just independent. Because those labels sound respectable. But the real driver is often, if I give you a real place in my life, you will have real access to me, and access is dangerous. This is why you can be amazing and still feel like you're getting the leftover version of them. Because armor always comes first, the work schedule comes first, the gym comes first, the friends come first, the solo time comes first, and you're not asking them to abandon those things. You're asking them to create a shared life, where you don't have to compete with their defenses. Because the truth is, a relationship requires inconvenience. It requires adjustment. It requires sometimes doing the thing that isn't your first instinct. And for avoidance, adjustment feels like losing the very thing they rely on to stay calm, control. And then you start doing the worst job in the world. You become the manager of their comfort. You monitor how much you ask for. You edit your feelings. You shrink your needs. You try to time your requests perfectly so they don't feel pressured. You start measuring love by how little you can require. And that is where people lose themselves. Because you don't want to be easy. You want to be secure. You want to be someone who can be loved openly, not carefully. So when we say avoidants don't make enough space, we're not saying they don't have time. We're saying their life is structured to prevent closeness from becoming a daily reality. And the shift you want is not more words. It's more room. Room that shows up in calendars, plans, routines, introductions, consistency, repair, because real space means you stop feeling like you're auditioning for a place you should already have. There is a version of this relationship where you spend your whole life trying to present your needs in the right way, the soft way, the careful way, the way that won't scare them, the way that won't make them shut down. And no matter how gently you speak, they still hear it like an accusation. Because when an avoidant partner is not shifting, your needs don't land as information. They land as pressure, and pressure to them feels like danger. They don't hear, "I miss you." They hear, "You're failing." They don't hear, "Can we talk about what happened?" They hear, "You're about to be trapped in an emotional conversation you can't win." They don't hear, "I need more consistency." They hear, "I'm not enough." And when someone is wired to associate closeness with criticism or overwhelm, their first move is defense. That defense can look like a lot of things. It can look like logic. It can look like sarcasm. It can look like distraction. It can look like, "You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. Why do we have to talk about everything? Can't you just be chill?" It can look like them suddenly changing the subject, or turning the problem back on you, or going cold and silent. And what this does is it teaches you that your emotions are unsafe in the relationship. It teaches you to swallow what you feel, to hide your disappointment, to pretend you're okay when you're not. And eventually you start living in a state of emotional censorship, where you're not even asking for love, you're asking for permission to be a human being. Now this is why the third keynote is so powerful, because it's the moment you start seeing something different. The shift is when they become curious instead of defensive. It's when they stop treating your needs like a threat and start treating them like a truth, something worth understanding, something worth responding to, not something to defeat, not something to escape, because curiosity is a sign that they are coming out of survival mode. It means their nervous system is not just reacting, it's reflecting. It means they can feel discomfort and still stay emotionally present enough to ask, "What is this really about for you?" And that is the beginning of emotional intimacy. A curious avoidant might not sound poetic, they might not suddenly become emotionally expressive, but they stop trying to win and start trying to understand. They might say, "When you said that, I felt overwhelmed, but I want to get it right." Or, "I didn't realize it felt that lonely for you." Or, "Help me understand what you need when I pull away." And even if those sentences come out clumsy, even if they say them with hesitation, even if they still need space afterward, the difference is enormous, because they are not dismissing your reality, they are entering it. Defensiveness is about protecting the ego. Curiosity is about protecting the connection. And you can feel the difference in your body. With defensiveness, you tighten, you start rehearsing your words, you start bargaining, you start trying to prove your feelings make sense, you start bracing for the shutdown. But with curiosity, your nervous system softens. Because now you're not fighting to be understood, you're being invited. And that invitation changes everything. Because a relationship can survive a lot of imperfection if there is a shared commitment to understanding. And this is why avoidants often don't make enough space in your life. Because making space requires acknowledging needs, theirs and yours. But when they see needs as shameful, they treat them like problems. And when you are a problem, you get managed, minimized, avoided. But when your needs are treated as valid information, then they can be negotiated, planned for, and honored. And suddenly space becomes possible. Because now they're not just protecting themselves from you, they're building with you. There's a difference between someone who says they want you and someone who rearranges their life to hold you. And if you've been with an avoidant partner, you know how intoxicating their words can feel in the moment. Because when they finally open up, when they finally soften, it feels like rain after a drought. It feels like you're being invited into something real. But then the days come where nothing changes, and you realize the tenderness had no weight behind it. It didn't cost them anything. It didn't require them to shift a single habit. It didn't ask them to move one brick in the wall they've built around their life. That's why this keynote matters. Because real change in an avoidant partner is not measured by intensity, it's measured by initiative. And not just any initiative that costs them something. Because anyone can show up when it's easy. Anyone can text when they're bored. Anyone can miss you when they're lonely. Anyone can say, I care, in the safe moments where nothing is required. But when someone is avoidant, the cost is the whole point. The cost is what their nervous system has been avoiding. The cost is what exposes them. The cost is what forces them to step out of their comfort and into responsibility. Think about what an avoidant usually protects: their time, their autonomy, their routines, their right to decide last minute, their ability to disappear without explanation, their life being structured around their preferences, their peace being maintained by keeping everything flexible and undefined. So when you look for a shift, you don't look for grand romantic gestures. You look for something far more telling. You look for the moment they choose you when it's inconvenient, when it would be easier to retreat, when it would be more comfortable to keep you in a separate compartment. Initiative that costs them something looks like planning ahead instead of waiting until the last second. It looks like them putting you on the calendar, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. It looks like them saying, I want to see you on Wednesday, and I'm moving things around to make it happen. It looks like them following through without you having to remind them. Because consistency is expensive for an avoidant, consistency creates expectation, and expectation triggers fear. So when they choose it anyway, they are not just being sweet. They are overriding their old wiring. It also looks like integration, and integration is one of the biggest costs, because it means you're no longer just a private relationship bubble. You're becoming part of their real world. Their friends know you. Their routines include you. You're invited into the places where they usually keep control. You're not a secret. You're not hidden. You're not separate. And for someone who has spent their life feeling safer in emotional isolation, letting you in like that is not casual, it's courageous. Initiative that costs them something also shows up in emotional labor, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, I'm going to do the uncomfortable thing instead of escaping it. It's them checking in after conflict, rather than pretending it didn't happen. It's them sending the message that repairs the connection. Not because you forced it, but because they don't want disconnection to be the new normal. It's them saying, I know I shut down yesterday. I'm sorry, I'm here now. And you might think, that should be basic. And yes, it should. But with an avoidant, that basic act is often the exact thing they've avoided their whole life, because repair requires admitting impact. And admitting impact threatens the ego they use to stay protected. And here's the part people miss. Initiative that costs them something is the difference between you being wanted and you being valued. Because being wanted can be emotional. Being valued becomes practical. It becomes choices. It becomes sacrifice. It becomes them making room for you where there wasn't room before. Not just saying, you matter, but proving, you matter enough for me to change how I live. So when you're trying to decide whether there is a real shift, don't ask, do they love me? Ask, do they take action that requires them to stretch? Ask, do they show up when they could disappear? Ask, do they move toward planning, toward inclusion, toward repair, toward consistency? Because if the only time they reach for you is when it costs them nothing, then you're not being chosen, you're being accessed. And you deserve more than being someone's comfort on demand. You deserve to be someone's deliberate decision in the shape of their life, in the way they spend their time, in the way they handle conflict, in the way they come back, in the way they make you real without needing you to beg for it. What you're looking for is not more feelings, it's more proof. Because an avoidant partner can feel a lot and still keep you on the outside of their real life. They can be intense in the moment, magnetic, affectionate, even vulnerable for a night. And then you wake up and you're back in the same old question. Where do I actually fit? And that's the painful trick of it. Chemistry can be loud while commitment stays quiet. Tenderness can be real while effort stays cheap. So when we talk about the fourth keynote, initiative that costs them something, we're talking about the kind of change you can't fake with words. We're talking about the kind of effort that forces them to give up their favorite protection, total control. Because for many avoidant partners, the thing they guard most isn't money or time, it's autonomy. It's the right to decide last minute, the right to keep everything flexible, the right to vanish when they feel emotionally exposed, the right to keep you close enough to feel comfort, but not close enough to create expectation. Costly initiative is when they start choosing you in ways that create expectation anyway, and they don't run from it. It looks like planning ahead, not because planning is romantic, but because planning is accountable. An avoidant who stays stuck will say, "We'll see. Maybe. I'll let you know." Because vagueness gives them an exit. But when they shift, they put something concrete on the calendar. They say, Thursday at 7, and they protect it. They follow through without you having to chase, without you having to double text, without you having to do the emotional project management. That costs them, because it means they are letting you rely on them, and being relied on is exactly what used to make them feel trapped. Costly initiative looks like reaching first. Not only replying when you reach out, not only showing up when you've made it easy, but initiating connection while they're busy, while they're stressed, while it would be simpler to retreat into their own world. Avoidants often keep power by staying reactive, letting the other person do the needing, so they can feel independent. When they initiate, it means they're no longer hiding behind the idea that closeness should only happen when it's convenient for them. Costly initiative looks like integration, meeting friends, being included in routines, being acknowledged in their world, not as a vague someday, but as a natural part of how they live. This is expensive for an avoidant because it makes the relationship real. It invites questions, visibility, vulnerability, and consequences. When they introduce you, when they invite you, when they stop keeping you separate, they're giving up the safety of compartmentalizing you, which is one of the most common ways avoidants keep intimacy at arm's length. Costly initiative also shows up in repair. Not the dramatic, "I'm sorry," speech that happens once and then disappears, but the quiet act of coming back after conflict when every part of them wants to pretend it didn't happen. They circle back. They name what they did. They acknowledge impact. They don't turn your feelings into a courtroom where you have to prove your case. They take responsibility, even when it's uncomfortable, because they've started valuing connection more than the relief of escape. And here's the moment that changes everything for you. You stop measuring love by how strongly they feel it in a single moment, and you start measuring love by whether they will inconvenience themselves to protect the relationship. Because if their effort only shows up when it costs them nothing, then you're not being chosen. You're being accessed. But if their effort shows up when it costs them comfort, control, ego, and the ability to disappear, then you're watching someone build capacity in real time. With actions like consistent plans, honest check-ins, real inclusion, and staying present when the conversation gets real, like choosing to sit in the discomfort and talk, when every instinct in them wants to shut down and escape. When you've been hurt by an avoidant partner, the moment you finally see them try, it can trigger two completely opposite instincts. Inside you at the same time, one part of you wants to melt, because you've been starving for that effort, and another part of you wants to strike, because you're thinking, where was this when I was crying in silence? Where was this when I was begging for the bare minimum? Where was this when I was shrinking myself just to keep the peace? And that anger is not petty. It's the sound of your dignity waking back up. But here's the danger. If you don't handle that moment wisely, you can accidentally destroy the very thing you've been praying to see, not because your standards are wrong, but because your delivery turns growth into a punishment. There's a difference between holding someone accountable and making them pay emotionally every time they take one step forward. And avoidant partners, especially the ones who are actually trying to change, are often moving toward you with shaky hands. They're not confident. They're not fluent in closeness. They're testing the ground. And if every attempt is met with contempt, sarcasm, or a trial about the past, their nervous system doesn't interpret it as, "This matters." It interprets it as, "Vulnerability equals humiliation." And they retreat right back into the only place they know how to feel safe, distance. So the fifth keynote is this: hold your standards, but don't punish growth, because standards are your self-respect, punishment is your unresolved pain. Standards sound like clarity. Punishment sounds like revenge dressed as honesty. Standards say, "I appreciate you showing up, and I need consistency." Punishment says, "Oh, now you want to show up, after everything." Standards say, "I'm open to rebuilding, but I need reliability." Punishment says, "Prove it, and by the way, I don't believe you." One builds a bridge, the other burns the wood while asking the other person to cross. And let me be clear, you are allowed to be cautious. You are allowed to protect your heart. You are allowed to remember patterns, because trust is not rebuilt by hope. It's rebuilt by repetition. But the goal is to respond to progress like a leader, not like a wounded soldier firing at anything that moves. Leadership is calm, specific, steady. It doesn't ignore what happened, but it doesn't make every new moment pay interest on the debt of the past. It says, "Here's what I need from you going forward." Because the future is what you're negotiating, not the past. The strongest thing you can do when you see genuine effort is to make your boundaries more precise, not more dramatic. Instead of emotional speeches, give them a clear map. Instead of testing them with silence, tell them the expectation. Instead of hoping they read your mood, name the need. If you need space, tell me, don't disappear. If we have conflict, we repair within 24 hours. I need plans that aren't last minute. I'm not available for a relationship where I'm a convenience. That's not controlling, that's clarity. And clarity is what gives an avoidant partner a chance to succeed. Because many of them are not just afraid of intimacy. They're afraid of failing at it. And vague expectations make them feel like they'll never get it right, so they give up. Now here's the part that protects you. Holding standards also means you don't confuse an apology with a pattern. You don't hand over full access because they had one good week. You don't reward effort with immediate overinvestment. You stay warm, but you stay grounded. You receive the effort, but you continue watching. You let them earn trust through consistency, not through intensity. This is how you stop abandoning yourself. Because the old version of you might have either chased harder or shut down completely. But the healthier version does something different. The healthier version stays steady, gives honest feedback, and makes choices based on behavior over time. And if you're wondering, but what if they're only trying because they're scared of losing me? Good. Let them be scared. Let that fear motivate them. Because if they truly value you, they will turn fear into action, not fear into manipulation. Your job is not to soothe them into comfort. Your job is to create a relationship where closeness is possible and disrespect is not. So you respond with a calm heart and a firm backbone. You acknowledge progress without surrendering your needs. You encourage growth without becoming someone's emotional rehabilitation center. You keep your standards where they belong, not as weapons, but as the price of admission to your life. If you've ever loved an avoidant partner, you already know that vague love is the most exhausting kind, because it keeps you stuck in interpretation instead of reality. You're not just in a relationship, you're in a constant investigation, decoding tone, timing, distance, silence, trying to figure out what they really mean. And the truth is, you can't build a secure bond on guessing. You don't need more mystery, you need more structure. And that's what this sixth keynote is about. Ask for space in concrete behaviors. Then watch repair, because space isn't something you feel. It's something you can see. Most people make one big mistake with avoidance. They ask for love in a way that's too abstract. They say, I need you to prioritize me. I need you to be more present. I need more effort. And those are valid needs, but to an avoidant nervous system, abstract needs feel like a fog they can't navigate. And fog makes them panic. They don't know what more present means. They only hear, I'm failing. And when they feel they're failing, they either argue or disappear. So the power move is to get specific, not because you're controlling, but because you're making it possible to succeed. Concrete space looks like frequency, planning, communication rules, and repair. It sounds like, I need to see you twice a week. I need us to plan at least 3 days ahead. If you need alone time, tell me directly and give me a time you'll reconnect. If we have conflict, we don't go silent for days. We repair within 24 hours. Because when you say it like that, you're no longer begging for closeness. You're setting a standard for how the relationship functions, and a relationship is a system, not just a feeling. Now, here's why this is so important. Avoidants often don't make enough space because space creates expectation, and expectation creates pressure. And pressure triggers shutdown. So you're not just asking for time, you're asking them to tolerate the discomfort of being counted on, and that discomfort is where growth happens. But you must also understand something. You can't force growth with emotion. You create the conditions for it with clarity, and then you observe behavior, because behavior tells the truth faster than words ever will. So after you ask for concrete space, you watch what happens next, because the real sign isn't whether they agree in the moment. The real sign is whether they follow through when it's inconvenient, whether they return when their instinct is to vanish, whether they repair when their ego wants to escape, because repair is the heartbeat of security. A relationship doesn't become safe because you never have conflict. It becomes safe because conflict doesn't lead to abandonment. If you've been in a pattern where every difficult conversation turns into days of silence, what you've been experiencing is not a communication issue, it's an attachment injury. Silence becomes a weapon. Distance becomes punishment, and you start living like you have to behave in a certain way to keep the peace. And that's not peace, that's fear. Repair is the opposite of that. Repair is when someone comes back, owns what happened, acknowledges impact, and reconnects with care. Repair is a text that says, I know I shut down. I'm sorry I'm here. Repair is a call that says, I need a moment, but I don't want to lose us. Repair is following up instead of pretending nothing happened, because pretending nothing happened is how avoidants protect themselves. But repair is how they protect the relationship. And here's the part that will change your life. You don't just watch for repair once. You watch for the pattern of repair. Because anyone can repair once when they're scared. The question is, do they build a consistent habit of returning, of addressing, of reconnecting? And also, do they respect your standards without making you feel guilty for having them? If every boundary you set is met with, you're too much, then the relationship isn't failing because you asked for too much. It's failing because they want the benefits of closeness without the responsibility of it. When you ask for concrete space and watch repair, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop being dragged into debates about whether your needs are reasonable. Because your needs are not up for debate. They are the conditions under which you can love without losing yourself. You're not asking them to be perfect. You're asking them to be accountable. You're not asking them to never need space. You're asking them to communicate it. You're not asking them to never get overwhelmed. You're asking them to return, and if they can do that consistently, you can build something real. But if they can't, then the truth becomes clear, not because you guessed, but because you watched the behavior unfold. And that's the most powerful way to protect your heart without closing it.